A little bit of thickness variation. Minor. Probably have to measure this with a ruler. But what you notice though is that this one here, it actually has a hub as part of the drum assembly, right? So notice that there's a bearing cone here. Notice that there's a bearing cone right here. Depending on the type of rotor that you're machining, that's going to determine what type of centering cones you're going to use. I'll show you both types. So we have our double-sided centering cones like this one right here. Then we have our single-sided centering cones like this one right here. Whenever we're doing a fixed rotor, what we want to do is we want to find a double-sided centering cone to where the cone is going to fit into the race itself. We don't want our cone fitting out here. We don't want our cone sitting right here around this edge. We want it sitting down inside the race. So set this one here. See how that one sits down in there? That one there, see how it doesn't sit down inside there very deep at all? So we're going to turn it around. That's going to be our cone for this side. Now on the back side, we have to find another cone. Take this one here. Pretty much falls all the way through. That's not going to do it, right? So another one down there, it's still too far. So we come down here, we find our next size up. And we use this one. So this one here, it doesn't sit down in there that deep. That one there is just right.
All the beds.
Yeah, this bed's too large. Anyway, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take this inner cone, set it here just like so. Then our rotor is going to go in just like so. And our outer cone is going to sit in here. Now, this rotor is going to be centered by these two cones right here. Now what we have to do is we have to add some spacers out here and then put the nut on here. You'll notice that there's a couple different types of spacers. We have some solid metal spacers, and then we have some that actually have noise dampening pieces to them. These here that are rubberized, this is to help dampen noise. So we slide this one here just like so. See how there's still some shaft showing there? So if we turn, or if we screw the nut all the way down, chances are it's going to bottom out. But if we use a couple of washers, a couple of thick washers like this right here. No, these two are actually designed for it. A couple of thick washers, goes into place like so. Now, notice this. Watch this nut. I'm going to try and install it. It's not going on, right? Yeah, this is a reverse threaded nut here. So I'm going to spin backwards, and it's going to screw into place, all right? So what I'm going to do is tighten this down. Going to take the wrench, snug it down. Keep in mind, it's not a lug nut, but it doesn't need to be tight. Snug it down, and now I'm set to go. That's if I'm doing a hub type rotor.
Does it center itself?
Or a fixed. What do you mean, did it center itself? Did it center itself this way?
So it doesn't wobble when you turn it on?
So what should happen now is, if it's correct, and I look at it, there shouldn't be any real wobble to it. Sometimes I can tell roughly if there's any wobble or not. So by simply taking a wrench and feeling if that wrench slides back and forth. This wrench is nice and smooth against it, and I feel it's not running in and out. Or I can hold it a little distance from it, hold it stable, and see if it looks like it's waving back and forth. This thing is nice and straight. Now keep in mind, just because it waves back and forth doesn't necessarily mean that it's been installed wrong. It could be that this rotor's actually warped, right?
Yeah.
But we know that if we pulled it off the car and it didn't have a bad vibration, and when I hook it up it's going like this, I probably don't have it centered right. We're not going to cut this one, of course, because it only has one surface left to it. So this is the rare type of rotor that you're going to be cutting.
Like the 99 S10s and stuff like that.
The what?
The 99 S10s. Yeah, they use them.
Yeah, where they still have the wheel bearings.
The two-wheel drive Chevy pickups from 88, 98.
Yeah, they have it. A lot of them have like
Chevy pickup including S10.
Well, I'm talking the full size because they're different. But yeah.
Well, we're most commonly going to run across is we're going to run across the hubless rotor or the floating. So we're not going to use the double-sided cones. Instead, what we're going to use the single-sided. Now, on this one here, what I'm looking for is notice I've got an inside edge, I've got an outside edge. Look at this hole closely between here and here. What do you notice?
One's got a chamfer to it.
The back side's got a chamfer, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm going to use this centering cone, you think I want to go on the front side where there is no chamfer? No. I want to go into the back side. Now, if you take a look here, this won't even fit down in there, right? So this is too big. This one's definitely going to be too big. So we'll get down in here. And of course, that size alignment spacer is missing. Wouldn't be any fun if it was here. Let me check this side over here.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Sorry to bug you. It's just common for women right there because the ones, like, I see sections, they're all small and big.
Okay, right behind the tool cage desk where Rick would sit, there's where the drum and disc brake mics are.
Okay.
Here we go.
Oh yeah.
Notice this one here is yellow. It goes with our yellow setup over here. So I'm going to find the other one that goes here, but wait till after my demo. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a cone. It hopefully sits in here just like so. So you can see it sits in here. Plus, there's some of it sticking out, right? Now, the other thing I need the clamps. So what you'll notice is I have different size cups. So this one sits just like so. This cup, oh, that's not going to do it, is it? It's too big. Okay, well, let me step down in size. We'll go all the way down for a minute. Here's two more cups. These are relatively small cups. Fits out here. Also fits in here. However, just because it fits doesn't mean it's your best choice. What you want to do is you want to find the biggest cup that will still fit inside this area right here. So this one here, it fits, doesn't it? Let's go the next size up, see if that one fits. This one here doesn't fit, does it? Notice it fits inside the cutting surface, but it doesn't fit down into the machine surface. So when I get down into our machine surface, this is the biggest size I can use and still fit down to that surface. Now, why do I want to use the biggest one possible?
Because it's more stable.
It's a lot more stable. If I grab the rotor right here and right here, it's still, if I start applying force to it, will move. The further out I grab it, the more stable it's going to be. Now, a couple other things that you guys need to take a look at. See this rust buildup right here? If I have rust buildup and the cup is not allowed to sit flat on there, even though I have a centering cone, it's still going to be able to wobble. So, if I have rust buildup, what I want to do is I want to knock that rust buildup off. Keep in mind, if this rotor has brake dust on it, you don't want to sit there and sand a bunch of dust into the air. You want to wash it off really good first, get all the dust out of the way. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to knock the rust off. It doesn't need to be polished, but it needs to be relatively flat. No, you don't need to. It's just got to be relatively flat and smooth. It's got a lot of rust buildup to take care of. Inside here, some things that you want to look out for is some older vehicles, they've got like a little gasket, like a little cotton gasket that sits behind the hub. And sometimes when you pull it off, half the gasket will stick here and the other half will stuck to the vehicle's hub. Get rid of that gasket, make sure it's all nice and flat in here. Once it's clean, let's say I'm done sanding it. Do I want to blow it off with compressed air? No. No, I never want to blow anything brakes related off with compressed air. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cone, put the cone in place. Now I'm going to take a spring, put the spring in place. So it's going to go cone, spring, or I'm sorry, not cone, cup, spring, then centering cone. What this does is now when I apply the pressure, when I push the rotor into place, right, and apply pressure to it, the cone stays pushed out. If I don't put a spring in there, what happens is when I put it in place, see what happened? How's it going to center? It's stuck way back in there. So spring, then cone, same size cone outside. Now, it's going to be spring loaded, see that? So it's going to try and push itself back out. I'm going to need the same spacer. There, looks pretty good. A couple of washers. Spindle nut, which is a reverse thread. Screw it back down. Now, one thing I do is once I get it just a little bit snug, just like this, I'll usually grab onto a cup and spin it back and forth. What that'll do is if there's any high spots or rust, it usually knocks them loose right on that spot right there. And in back, I'll do the same thing, just to get a little bit of a drag back and forth. Now, snug it down, and I want to check it to make sure it's not wobbling back and forth. If it's wobbling back and forth, I need to fix that. So if we stand here and look at it, the thing looks relatively flat. If it is wobbling, shut it off, loosen it up, spin it around a half turn, tighten it back up, and recheck it because it's probably just not sitting flush. Okay, now this is where things get interesting because you can cut a rotor in many different ways, but there's one way that's going to cause you very few headaches, another way that maybe might cause you a lot more headaches. First thing I want you guys to notice is this table moves in two different directions. We have an x-axis and a y-axis. So what happens is, if I spin it this way, you can see this arm is moving in this direction, right? If I spin it this way, it moves in and out in this direction. One of the things I want you guys to notice, a lot of times when you walk up to the machine, this piece here will not be on it because maybe someone just finished up cutting a drum. I'll show you a couple of pitfalls. A couple of things I notice a lot of students making a mistake on. First thing I notice is when a student comes up, this thing's on here just like so, right? They come, say, okay, I'm going to put my cutter on it. They'll pop this off just like so. You set this in place just like that. You see what just happened? There's a washer underneath there, right? Okay. Give me a second here. Okay, now, look down here. You see the distance between the cutting surface and the flat table? How thick is that? About the thickness of a washer, right? What's going to happen is even if I tighten this thing down to where it doesn't want to move, what ends up happening is when I start cutting, this thing starts vibrating like a diving board. And so when it starts cutting, it starts getting these really, really weird chatter marks. Make sure that your cutter plate is sitting directly on the table itself. I can't tell you how many times over the course of a semester we'll see that. And what ends up happening is students don't want to lose the nut and washer, so they'll just toss it back on so it doesn't get lost. Make sure that you pull that washer off. So when this thing sits down, it should sit down nice and flat on the table. Now, if you guys take a look now, you see any light at all? No, it's sitting flat. So this is for our rotor cutting tool, or for cutting rotors. And this here, this is for cutting drums. So a lot of times you'll come up and there may be a different cutter on it because the person before you was cutting a drum or a rotor, or maybe they're both on. So, a couple things I want to show you guys. First off, let's say I'm going to cut myself a rotor. So I set this thing up on here like so. Okay, it's got to be out far enough. Okay, that's not going to do it. Now as far as I can be. And this thing's still not lined up, right? So what I've got to do is I've got to run this table out to where my cutter is going to be centered. Now, the cutter is centered over the rotor, right? Acceptable?
No.
Why?
This thing's way too far.
That's way too.
It'll cut though, right?
Too much of a cantilever.
It'll cut. Here's a problem. While this physically will cut the rotor, the problem is it sits out here and vibrates because it's so far out. So your best choice for making any type of cuts at all, if you want a nice finish on it, what you want to do is you want to run this table as far this way as you can. So now this cutting table is slid, or the cutting tool is slid in as far on the table as possible. So here it is, it's all the way forward, so it can't go anymore. If I could, I'd like to have it sit right here, but I can't because of how our rotor's spaced. And actually I found out. Hold on a second. Found our spacer. Slide that off there. There we go. That's the metal spacer I was looking for. So apparently someone who was cutting before couldn't figure out how to make this thing match, so they started spacing it from the inside. You don't want to space from the inside. You want this thing as far in as possible. Let's say as far as possible, because the same thing, the further out on a shaft it is, if it's hanging way out here, it's got a tendency to want to move back and forth. If it's in real close, it's not going to move back and forth as much. So, now, see how far in our cutter is on our table? We have very little hanging out here, and we have very little hanging out here. Everything's nice and close, everything's going to be nice and snug. Now, the other thing I've got to pay attention to is how far this way it sits on our table. When I'm doing that, let me open this up just a touch. What I want to do is I want to run this table pretty much all the way in. Now, table's all the way in. What I want to do now is I want to run this table out about 5 turns or so, and I'll explain why that is. So, take the table, run it out 5 turns. Now, I want to set my cutter up so that it's all the way towards the inside edge. This is important because, well, let's say I didn't make this measurement. And let's say I just sort of said, okay, I'm going to lock it down right here. What's going to happen? Even if I go all the way in to where it ends, am I going to cut that thing? No. So I want to bring it out a couple of turns, right? Then I want to slide it into its end. So in case I got to get a little bit further in, I've got a couple turns here. This thing all the way in just like so. Now the other thing that you want to look at is you want to look from the top down, and you want to look at where these cutters are. If this cutter here is further forward than this cutter is, as it starts cutting, it's not that big of a deal that they're off a little bit, but what's going to happen is this is going to hit the hat, the hub part, before this one here even makes it off the cutting surface. So if you're going to offset one, make sure you have it offset so that the inboard goes off first before the outboard.
And that can just be done visually.
Yeah, that can just be done visually. We are really, really close here. We're gonna be good. All right, so I'm gonna snug this thing down just like so. Now we're set up. This is tight. This is tight. Now, what we have to do is we have to start making our cuts. So the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna come out halfway on our cutting surface, just like so. Now, if you guys come around to this side for a second, you'll notice we have a couple of different knobs. This one here says rotor. This one here says drum. Are you clear? So if I slip it on, if I put it on the rotor right here, the machine turns on, it starts spinning. If I put it on the drum, the machine turns on, it starts spinning. So what's the difference between drum and rotor? The difference between drum and rotor is which feed is going to work. So let me put on rotor for a second. Make sure it goes all the way off. We're kicking back on. All right. So here's my automatic feeds. If I hit this automatic feed, it makes the table move across the x-axis.
Right.
So if I turn on automatic feed and I take these cutters and I move them in this direction, how well is that going to work out for me? It's not. It's going to groove a rotor really, really bad. In fact, it's probably going to destroy the rotor. If you don't catch it in time, it's probably going to snap the cutter off too. So the nice thing about this machine is it allows you to make mistakes. So I'm on rotor. If I turn on my drum feed right now, it says, well, that's interesting that you asked for it, but I'm not going to let you do that. If I turn on my rotor feed, it says, all right, we'll give you rotor feed. Just like if I'm on drum, you guys ready? If I'm on drum and I turn this thing on, it'll start feeding. Like so. I don't want that to feed very far. Give it a little bit more time, it's going to run that thing right into the cutter and create problems. But when I turn on rotor, it doesn't let me. So I'm cutting a drum. If it's on drum, it won't allow me to drag the table out and groove the drum. If I'm cutting a rotor and it's on rotor, it won't allow me to drag the table in the x-axis and cut the drum or cut the rotor. So we want it in rotor. Put it in rotor. Let me make sure I get this thing recentered again. Okay. Now we're right about halfway here, right? Now what I'm going to do is these are my locks for my cutter. I loosen my locks up, and then these are my adjustment levers. Notice they go in different directions. So if you look, bigger numbers go in this direction, and on this one, bigger numbers go in the other direction. So I'm going to slowly spin this until these get close. Once it gets close, oh wow, this thing's off by a ton. Once it gets close, you hear it? Now let's shut this off. Guys, come around here and take a look. It's touching from right here to right here. This spot, not the rest of it, it's touching from here to here. You can see the scrape is only from here to here. What that means is this is a high spot this way, and this is going to be a low spot this way. So one of two things. Either this rotor is warped, which is interesting because it's just been cut, or I don't have it set in flat, or the person before me didn't have it set in flat and didn't bother to check it. So what we'll do to make sure it's not our problem, back this thing off a little bit. Loosen it up just a touch. We'll spin it around a little bit, right? Just to make sure that's not the problem. Now we'll fire it back up. Put it in there slowly. You want a piece of metal in your eye?
I gotta sit it up.
Not this, it's not going to matter. Now we'll bring back in here. And it's going to hit again. Now if I shut it off, and it's hitting in exactly the same spot, what does that tell me?
It's the high spot.
And if you guys take a look, it's still in the same spot. So it's not us. If it was now hitting over here, then I would know that I had made a mistake. This is what's called doing a scratch test. So this thing is big time work. So we'll just go with that. Put it back on the rotor for a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now move the inside edge in. When it gets to where it wants to start cutting. Oh, this thing is horribly warped. Okay. Now, each of them is making contact. At this point right here, I want to do what's called a manual cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this cutter all the way out once by hand. The reason why I do that is on a new rotor, or on an old rotor, that hasn't been cut yet, typically what ends up happening is the brake pads are going to wear between here and here and wear between here and here. So there's usually going to be a little lip. You don't want this machine to hit that lip when it's an automatic feed. You want to be able to slow down when it hits that lip. So we're going to run this thing out by hand. Wow, this is bad.
That doesn't sound like it. Sounds like a train.
I know.
And now, once we get it run out by hand, now we're going to run it in by hand.
It's not warped as bad on the inside.
I know.
Anyone want to take that question or statement? Why is it not warped as bad on the inside? Anyone want to take that? Why is it not warped as bad towards the inside edge?
It's further in where the
Because
distance
it's closer to its rotational center point, right? Now what I want to do is I want to run this thing down and make a little cut here. I want to make sure that I've gone off the inside edge right there, and I want to make sure that I've gone in far enough to clear. Take a look here. I want to clear that actual cutting surface there. This one's been cut a lot, so it's cut down. We have a little bump there instead of a recess. Now that I've done that, now I can start doing my automatic cuts. So, loosen up my box, cut 4/1000, 5/1000 out of it. We're going to snug it down slice. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hit our automatic feed. Back over to this side one more time. Over here, we have a knob. And that knob goes from 0 to 100. And that knob is basically our feed speed. If we want to make a cut, we can make a cut that is slow. You see how slowly that thing there is moving?
Yeah.
That's a slow cut, right? Or we can make a fast cut. See how fast it's moving now?
Yeah.
So, you have a speed between 0 and 100. Typically your fast cuts you want to do around a 70. That's fast enough that you don't celebrate birthdays waiting for this thing to turn the rotor. Slow enough that it's not going to cause too much stress on the machine. Once you complete your fast cuts and once you get a nice smooth surface, then you're going to go back . Now there's one thing I didn't do here.
Well, is the slow cut also a quarter size?
Slow cut is just enough to clean up, so typically 2 to 3 thousandths you're good. Now, one thing I didn't do, and so far this rotor hasn't exhibited any problems, is I didn't put any noise suppression on this rotor yet. This rotor, though, is not going to have any issues with how it sounds. As long as I have that flat cutting sound, I'm not sweating it at all. But it is a good habit to get into noise suppression. Because if you ever hear the rotor ringing while it's cutting, what it's doing is it's chattering, and your cut can end up looking something like this right here. See all the chatter marks? That's from our cutter vibrating as it makes its cut. So we'll go ahead and put some noise suppression on this in just a second. I personally think with how bad this one is, because this side's even worse, I think with how bad this one here is, this was a classic washer underneath and the thing was bouncing the whole time, which is why you see that such bad ringing. So if you look over here, you can actually see the difference between our fast cut right here and our smooth cut right here.
Yeah.
So I just didn't want to make multiple cuts, and that's why I did that. So here's our fast cut right here. If you run your fingernail across it, you can feel how hard it is, and then run across the smooth one. The other thing that you can do is you can take a ballpoint pen and you can actually feel it. You can feel as it gets smoother. So this one here, you can visually see. So the problem is that if I do a fast cut and I put a set of brake pads on that, it's like a record. You guys know what a record is?
Yeah.
Those black things you find in museums.
Ever try to record something into a break?
In and out, that would be interesting.
See if it makes
Hot rod, we got a project for you. All right, so anyway, when the brake pad touches it, it's going to have a tendency to want to walk outward or walk inward, depending on the rotation or the direction of rotation. So what we do is we go back through and we do a slow cut that actually takes a lot of that threading out of it. And the last thing we need to do is we need to do a non-directional finish. So we're going to take a piece of 150 grit sandpaper. On a block of wood, I'll get you guys some fresh sandpaper up here. You want to turn the thing on. Pull this off here. So after our cut's all done, fire it up. Doesn't matter whether I got a drum or rotor right now. I'm going to put my sandpaper across this, just like so. Just going to hold it there, run it back and forth, 30 seconds or so. And what it does is it takes that it makes a non-directional finish. Now, if you take a look here, see how it's got a much smoother finish to it? Even if we bring it around here to where it's been cut already, see how smooth that finish is now? Even though we can still see the rough versus the fast versus our slow cut, it really smooths it out. The other thing it does is any little pieces of metal that were left behind, any little shavings, it knocks them off. And that's important, because if these shavings end up embedded into the new brake pads, you've got little metal shavings in them which can tear up rotors and cause noises. So we knock the shavings off there, and we're in good shape. Any questions on that?
So, you don't have to do both sides at the same time?
Yeah, I normally would do both sides at the same time.
Say you're machining them because they're scored.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Is there any way to actually measure the depth of it, or do you just keep machining at a 4,000th at a time until it's?
That's why we measure with our pointed micrometers and we see how deep it actually is. But as far as let's say I knew that was a 10,000 steep score or 12,000 steep score, I can't say, okay, well I know it's 12,000, so I'm going to run it in 12,000. Because if I try and make a 12,000 cut, it's really going to drag down. You can get 6,000s, really, really sharp cutters. You might go get 8 if you slow down.
And then your final 2,000s for the slow
Yeah, and then final 2 or 4,000s. A lot of times, what I run across is the car comes in, I'm doing a set of brakes to it. I like to turn rotors just because a a lot less brake noises and issues, and I get a steady coefficient of friction. I have problems with the car coming back. But what I'll do is when I run it in and out on my manual cut, I can tell about how straight that rotor is. Like if it's making contact all the way around, the entire circumference all the way in and out, I know that's a pretty flat rotor. So instead of wasting my time doing a fast cut and going back and doing a slow cut, I say, I know this rotor's flat. I'm gonna run it in 4/1000s, maybe 5. I'm just gonna do one slow cut. But at that point, you're sort of rolling the dice, because if you get all the way out to here and then it misses a little spot, you're going. But I can tell you, most all the time, you can tell on that initial manual cut in and out whether or not you'll be able to take it. And I'd say I'm probably running about a 90+% success rate on that. Every so often, when I want to come back, you got a kid here. Run it back in and go out and
How many passes should you do on it?
celebrate what it's doing, huh?
How many passes should you do on it fast?
I want to do as few passes as possible. When I cut any rotor at all, I want to do as few passes as possible. I want it clean and nothing else. Once I get a nice clean surface being cut on it, I don't want to keep practicing. I don't want to lighten my rotor. I want to keep as much metal on it as possible. Which is where the argument comes in of should you even turn rotors or not. And you guys will be able to make that decision. I turn rotors on cars. I turn rotors on cars because as the vehicle goes through a set of brake pads, those rotors are not perfectly flat. There's little tiny imperfections in it. The other thing that it does is the rotor becomes polished, which you think, okay, well that's nice and smooth. Well, glass is nice and smooth, but it doesn't necessarily make a real good friction surface. So sometimes that rotor surface ends up too smooth. So we want to put that cut back on it. So those are just some reasons why I do it. Other people will say, not at all, because I want to save as much meat as possible. My thing is, I want to save as much meat as possible, but I want to have a nice smooth surface for it, at least for the new patch storage. Any questions on that? Okay, noise suppression. Noise suppression, one of two ways.
Yeah, no.
First way,
I'm very
the first way is to use these spring-loaded pads. Now, what you'll notice here is that, see how soft that is right there? I want to slide it in until I get a little bit of spring loading on it so that it doesn't move back and forth. But I don't want to slide it in so far see what's happening here? Now I have the bar hitting the silencing pad. I want a little bit of space. I want it to be spring loaded, but I don't want it to be bound up. So right now it's spring loaded, it's running off with this spring instead of bending with the bar. I'm going to take that and I'm going to snug it down. Same thing for my inside pad. I come in here just like so. That one obviously, actually that's just about right. Take a look in here, I can see space. As long as I can see space between that, I'm okay. Snug it down. And now it's good to go. That's going to stop any ringing from taking place. If your machine doesn't have a setup like this, what you have to use instead is a silencing band sort of like this, except it's much narrower and it goes across the rotor's cooling vents. But these rubber silencers help to stop that ringing noise. I expect you guys to use these on every cut just because it keeps that problem out of the way. And once you're all done, slide them off and you're good to go. Now if I'm cutting a drum, same setup as far as my cups and cones. Same setup if it's a fixed drum, using my 2 cones without a spring. The only difference is now all my cutting is going to be done with the x-axis instead of with the y-axis. The other thing, I'm going to set it on drum. Same fast cut, same slow cut, same everything around. The other thing is silencing. Silencing for a drum, we wrap this big old band around. I'm going to set one up over here so I can show you guys how the drum works. So this machine here cuts rotors and drums. This machine here cuts rotors and drums. So this is the in and out, just like this is. this is the back and forth, just like this is. Okay? This machine right here, what does it cut? Rotors, no drums. We have the in and out, but we have no back and forth this way. So drums and rotors, only rotors. Now, differences. Tubeless, right? So what do I need? What do I need down here? I need a couple of cups, right? So, same size cups. See these two cups right here? What do you notice about them? Even though they're the same size, what do you notice?
They got holes in them.
They have holes in them.
And these are different.
See how this one is tighter through here? This one is the inboard one. The problem is, when I'm cutting a drum, right? When I'm cutting a drum, that cutter has to fit down in there. This big old bar has to fit down inside there. So I keep the wide one out here, or inside here, it's a lot more likely to hit the bar. So I run this as my inboard. Now what do I need? Spring. I need a spring. We'll grab a spring down here. Then I need a single-sided cup. Good? Cone. Or cone, thank you. Single-sided cone. Goes in there. Drum goes into place. Cup goes into place. Troy, you want to hold on for a second? Or David, there you go. Now I need a spacer and I need a nut. Now a couple things I want to show you guys about this nut. This nut here is threaded all the way out to this end. On this side, the threading starts way back in here. What that allows you to do, if you guys come over here for a second. You see how there's a little bit of shaft showing here? If I put it on like this, it starts threading from here, and what's going to happen is it's going to hit here and there's still going to be some space, right? If, however, I'm right in that happy spot between needing another spacer or not, set it around just like so, reverse thread like the other one, and everything snugs down. So we're going to tighten that down. Just like we did our last one. Now, a couple things. First of all, just like we did our last one, you think it's a good idea to have this thing all the way out here and run this cutter all the way out?
No.
No, because now we get the big old diving board, right? Things bouncing all over the place. So what you want to do is the same thing we did last time. We'll loosen our cutter up. We want to run this all the way in. We're going to run it all the way in. Now as we run it all the way in, see how it's pushing our cutter in? Get it all the way in just like so. Take it out. Couple of turns. Just in case I'm not at the very edge. I can get back in there and touch one. I like to have a little bit of space too. Oops, I screwed that up on a couple of thousands. Now I'm going to take this, run it into the inside edge just like so. And I'm going to tighten that down. Now the other thing I got to make sure is I got to make sure that it'll move off of here. And one thing I didn't mention to you guys, you may run into this, is when you come up to this machine, someone may have just got done cutting a rotor. This thing may be all the way out here. Now, is it going to be possible to get your cutter to that inside edge at that angle?
Totally.
Impossible. Impossible. See that? I can't even begin to touch that inside edge. That's how all this happens right here. See how ground down that is there? Because people keep trying. Never ever works, but they keep trying. to get that thing all the way in there. So you need to make sure that you're pretty close to being in straight. So once again, I can take it all the way in, right? And I can back it out a couple. A little bit of wiggle room. If I was going to paint a car and I knew it took exactly, we'll say 84 ounces, I'm not going to mix 84 ounces, I'm going to mix 85 ounces, just so I know that I have enough. So that's where my couple extra little charges come from. Alright, so that's all the way in now. Now I can run it back in, just touch. Just touch, everything's good, nothing's touching inside there. Same thing. When I start my cut, I want to start it from the center. So I'm going to run this thing halfway out. I'm going to fire it up. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I want to run my cutter out, but I got to pay attention. I don't want to jam it into there, because otherwise it's going to break the cutter off. So, run it out a little bit. As I start getting close, I'm going to slow down. Okay. Set my lock here so it doesn't move around while I'm making my cut. And listen to this. Sounds like it's cutting pretty straight, right?
Yeah.
If we show this thing off, and we take a look around, we can see this is making a scratch all the way around the entire surface. Now, listen to this. You guys hear it ringing? You hear that ringing? That ringing is what's going to cause those chatter marks. I don't want that to occur. What I'm going to do...
Sounds like a wine glass.
I'm going to put a silencing band on it. This is an art. Once you get to where you can do this without using profanity, consider yourself successful. We're going to take this thing, we're going to wrap it around. A little bit of tension. Notice I'm not even trying to wrap it out here. It's just...
Not worth it.
Yeah. That's better when I hammered in it. 16 penny yellow paper. Alright, now bring this thing around. I want to grab it in just like so. Slide it through. Now at this point, now I can work on sliding up just like that, alright? Oh, we're not going to stay all the way up there. As long as I've got tension on it, I'm in good shape. Alright, fire this thing up. Here all the ringing is gone.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why I make my first cuts is check with this thing off is because if you look at this, how can you tell if that thing's straight with that band all over the place? Visually, it messes with you. So if you can get it set up and get your first little initial contact and stuff, make sure everything looks like it's going good, then you can put your band on it. Alright, so now, I'm going to run all the way out. Why all the way out?
Check the promo.
So I cut a little lip off. Then I'm going to run it all the way in by hand. Then I'm going to start making my automatic cuts. So, run all the way out. You guys can see right inside there, you can see that I'm spinning it fast enough that it basically just came out of there almost like the thing threaded like a very coarse thread bolt. But now I'm going to run it back in, and if I run it back in slowly, you'll see that my threading ends up being a whole lot closer. See how much closer that is? I'm not really concerned with it being real close, but that's what my automatic cuts are for. I'm going to run this thing in. Now, here's the other problem. A lot of times it's hard to look back in there and see when it's going to touch. I can watch the other side or watch the bottom and see exactly where that cutter is. So as I'm spinning it in, I can watch that cutter moving in. Cutter's getting pretty close. Slow it down right there. Right there, okay? Did I ever look at where that cutter was?
Nope.
No, I was able to see it off the bottom, right? So now, same thing. I've made my cut. I want to take a couple thousandths off it. Keep in mind that with a drum, you're only cutting one surface. You're not cutting two surfaces. So it's not like I'm cutting 4 thousandths off this side and 4 thousandths off this side. So don't be afraid to go 6. So I can go 6 thousandths, no problem. I'm going to run this thing out 6 thousandths, there's 70 right there, or 62. So we'll take the thing all the way out to close to 70. Push that up, and tighten down. We're 70 now. Now over here, I have feed speed, much like I do on this one, except it doesn't go 0 to 100. So what I want to do, instead it goes 0 to 20. What I want to do is I want to do my fast cut somewhere around 14 to 16. I'm going to do 16. So let me show you real quick. Loosen this up right here. This is what holds it, right? Set it at 16. See the hash mark right there. Tighten it down. Now that's going to be a feed speed of 16. Very simply, take this lever, slide it over. Now, if you want to get real fancy, this thing has an automatic shut-off too, to where you can set it to where you want it to shut off. So I said, okay, I have to shut off right about there. Put it in place. Now, as this thing's feeding, when it gets to this spot, it's going to push that lever and shut it off automatically.
I assume though.
Uh-oh, I might have missed. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Just a little.
Oh, man, I'm so close. I only missed by 2 inches. Yeah, what I do is I loosen this thing up right. The first time what I do is I find out where the end is, and then I can set my stop to that.
I presume though, even though it's an automatic feed, you never leave the final point.
Glad you brought that up. As a technician, when you're doing a set of brakes on a car, you do not make money by standing here watching the rotor go round and round and round and round. What I did as a technician was I would stand here, I would make my fast cuts, get all my cuts set, then when I do my slow cuts, I would walk off and go do whatever I needed to do. That's as a technician. In this building, as long as this machine is running, now I can tighten it down and now it automatically shut off. As long as this machine is running, you are standing here with this machine. You are not to leave it unattended. We have people walking by that have no idea, what's that? And then all of a sudden they're missing a finger. It is possible that during a slow cut something can go wrong. It is possible. But typically by the time you're doing a slow cut, it's a really, really slow surface. I've never ever had a machine malfunction during a slow cut. But in here, yes, you will stand with it at all times. But if you want to make money in the world, you're not going to make money by watching the rotor spin around surface. You're going to get your slow cut going, get over there, get the brakes hung, pull that one off while you're putting that rotor on, right? You're doing a slow cut over here, or you get your other one cut and you do your slow cut, go hang the brakes on the other side, come back with your rotor. Okay, so that's our first cut. Now, this is the way I've ended up with metal in my eye 3 times, I believe. Minimum of twice. I'll shut the thing off, and there's all these shavings down here, right? Simple enough. Try and blow them out of there. It doesn't work out real well, guys.
That thing's round.
Yeah, it comes right back in, and you're going, oh yeah, that was done. All right, I need to take it to the hospital. Let them roll my eyelid back and get that piece of metal. Because it very rarely ever comes out real easily. So, if you're going to clean these things off sometimes, just quickly turn it on. It'll sort of clean itself a little bit, all right, once or twice. But if not, do not blow down the side there. Do not hit it with compressed air. Get a brush and brush the chips out. But I can see exactly what's going on now. Now, you guys feel this surface real quick. How's that surface? That's not real smooth, is it? That surface is not good at all. So even though it's cut flat, this is not a good surface. If you put this onto a car, what would happen when you applied the drum brakes is the brake shoes would come out and they would try and walk. They would try and follow this thread. So they'll walk as far as they can and then they'll snap back. That's the hold down springs pulling them back. And so as you're stopping, it'll be pop, 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 pop noise. You're, what the heck's going on? It's because the drums are threaded. So even though it's flat, doesn't mean it's right. So we're going to go back through and we're going to make a slow cut. And our slow cut's going to be at about 4. We're not going to do that because I don't want to spend a half hour watching the same big slow cut. Any questions so far? Now, if I want to cut rotors, a little bit different. Same idea. Same idea.
Sorry, one question. When you go back to do the slow cut, start at the outside and just work it back in, or just start at the middle, right?
No. I make my cut, it comes to the outside edge, I reset back at my inside edge. Okay, make my adjustment, make my cut, run it all the way back in to the inside edge, make my adjustment. So if I have to do 2 or 3 fast cuts, it's all the way back in each time.
So You're always
loosen up
working.
the lock, make the adjustment, make the cut. All the way back in, loosen up the lock, make the adjustment, make the cut.
You're always working towards the outside.
Yeah, you're always working towards the outside. And with rotors, same thing. I'm going to run it all the way back in, make my cutter adjustment, then make my automatic cut. All the way back in. Don't make the cutter adjustments out here. Because if I make a cutter adjustment out here, actually, if I were to run this thing out and then try and put it back in, it's going to run into the edge of this, right? And that can be really, really hard on cutters. So I always want to be inboard whenever I make that adjustment. Now, the other difference with this one is automatic rotor feed. Notice I have this so that it's cleared nicely. Automatic rotor feed is back here. The nice thing about this one is you don't get to really choose a number. You get your fast cut and you get your slow cut. The center is off. Now, real quick here. I'm going to run this thing back in for a second. Notice I turn the machine off. I turn the machine off because I'm not sure exactly where the cutter is. And if I run this cutter into this wall of this drum, it's going to be bad. So I get it in here, set it up here just like so, fire it up, spin it out so it makes contact. Okay. So I've got everything set. Alright, let's go ahead, let's make a cut. Oh, cool. Yeah, everything's going cool. All right, sounds good. Yeah. Oh, crap, what's going on? Oh, man. See what just happened there? That groove is probably so deep, that drum's junk. This machine here will allow you to make bad decisions. This one over here will prevent it. But you heard how it sounded normal when it started? You're like, okay, yeah, everything's going good. What? Whoa, hold on, that's getting loud. Usually, you guys don't catch that fast. Usually the thing locks up, and then come over here and go, what's going on? Oh, cool, you got yourself a water groove there. Helps dissipate water, right? Might as well cross-drill it while we're at it. Okay, over here, rotor machine, same setup here. We can run it in and out, same way. This one here, you put a drum on it. Congratulations, you're going nowhere. Nothing's going to happen. The only difference is, same thing, on and off speed. The only difference is my speed right here. The further you move it out, the faster it's going to cut. So here's a 2, here's a 4, right, and faster cuts this way. Spin it in for slower cuts. The other difference is how I engage and disengage. This is a little red button here. That's the feed. That's the stop feed. So turn it on right now. See it's not moving? There's my feed right there. I want to stop the feed. Like that. I want to speed it up. Don't make it fool me. Come on. Come on. Apparently this thing's got one speed. Yeah.
Slow and slower.
Slow and slower, yeah, this thing's nuts. That's still just a slow, no, it just slowed down a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah.
We can slow it down. Okay, it does have different speeds.
So we've got turtle and really old.
Yeah. Definitely not rabbit turtle. Okay, so. Any questions, guys? Yeah, you would go in on both of our cutters and bring it up. Just keep in mind, we have our cutter piece down here is our cutter piece where it's going to slide in. It looks just like that one right over there. So it's got 2 different, so it gets to have knobs there also. Now, if you can't keep track of how much you cut off it, if you guys come over here, once you make a contact, what you can do is if you hold the outside edge and spin the inside edge, you can set this up on 0. Hold this outside edge, spin the inside edge. You can set this up on 0. So now they're both set on 0. So now any cuts I make, I say, okay, I'll make a 4,000, so I'll make a 4,000. make another 4, another 4. I can count exactly how many thousands. So if I knew how thick it was before I ever started cutting it, I would know about where the thing's going to start getting into some trouble. And so if I'm halfway through my cut and I see that I still got time to go, I know I'm done. Any questions? All right, you guys have some lab sheets to work on. You can work on those. I'm going to pull the third group over here. Once I'm done with them, then I'll open all these up and you guys start coming through and everyone starts practicing turning drums and rotors. I realize you're not going to get this done tonight. We're going to be working on the drum and rotor turning at least for next week or two. That's fine. I've got no problem.